Good morning and good afternoon to you wherever you may be as you tune in today. And thank you for joining us. For those who have joined us for the first time, this webinar series is focused on HR and workplace topics with a lens of talent, workplace culture, DEI, and sustainability. I'm Sonia Sapaban, CEO of OurOffice, where we help organizations with what we call a DEI operating system for planning, managing, measuring, and engaging everyone to drive a more inclusive workplace experience for all individuals so that they can belong and be productive. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Deanna Smith, Civil Rights Officer at Monterey Salinas Transit, and Ignacio Bonell, EVP, Strategy and Supply Chain Management at AM General, the builders of the iconic Humvee vehicles. Welcome to you both. Before we get into the meat of this conversation, let's make sure that everybody is familiar with the Zoom and what we use here. So, of course, you all are familiar with the Zoom. You've used them before, and I'm sure during the past several years of our lives. But I just wanted to emphasize that this is an interactive webinar. So please use the chat function to provide your comments. You can also use the Q&A to put some questions in there. We have our colleague at our office, Anushka Sarif, who will be moderating the questions in real time and chiming in as needed. So thanks in advance, Anushka. We'll answer as many questions as we can throughout and also afterwards, if needed, as long as you provide your email address when you ask your question. Also, please note the session is being recorded and will be available after the webinar on our events page at ouroffice.io/events. Last but not least, the webinar is approved for both SHRM and HRCI recertification credits. We'll share the activity codes later on. So, Deanna and Ignacio, again, welcome to our webinar. It's great to have you both here. To begin, I'm sure our audience would love to get to know you better. Can you please each spend a minute or two just introducing yourself and your current role, as well as your background and connection to this topic and personal experiences that have brought you to this moment in your life and your career. Would you like to go first, Deanna?
Sure, and thank you for having me. So I'm going to go back a little bit, right to the start. And I grew up, as I say, in the glow of Title IX, which was passed in 1972. I was about 7 years old. And I was basically raised by that girl, Mary Tyler Moore, Mrs. Brady, Mrs. Partridge, and Charlie's Angels. So I had there was no lack of these kind of modern female role models growing up from a very young age. So I think, I feel privileged in that regard. I also went to a kindergarten through 8th grade school in a rural area in the Monterey Bay area where I grew up. We had, at 6th grade, we were provided with a dedicated coach. He was also our English teacher. And we benefited from intramural sports, and we had the boys and girls had teams. We had our own coaches. We competed with other schools in the area. We got on the bus and competed. And I'll tell you, our girls' teams were as attended as the boys, really. Parents were very supportive back then. We also experienced school busing at that time. And I remember there was a lot of controversy about it. Well, I don't recall ever having racism ever tolerated or even really kind of permeating my younger school experience. It was certainly a controversial issue. My parents, thank goodness, happened to be supportive of it. In fact, I grew up with Hispanic and Filipino aunts, uncles, and cousins. And my mother, actually, I'm adopted. My parents adopted me. My mother actually was raised on a reservation in Arizona. She was a Native American, half Native American. And so my peer group, we never had that kind of, we didn't tolerate it. We were all in. When we were all in for women's rights. We had teachers that had us discuss from both sides of certain controversies in 7th and 8th grade. So what I experienced more was classism. it occurred to me early on, my family was more rural. My mother came from a family of 10 children, and she was one of two who could read and write, and not very well. And so I remember thinking, that was kind of my challenge, is understanding the kind of class issues that went on. I also had to delay college. All of my peers went off to college right after high school, and I had to delay it for some family reasons. But later in life, I ended up working as the executive director of a nonprofit organization in Old Town Salinas. I had my own business there, and I got my bachelor's degree in public administration at that time. And suddenly, it kind of fell together for me that I wanted to be involved in public service. From there, I actually was hired where I am now at MST. I was hired as clerk to the board and executive assistant for our general manager. And over the last nearly 13 years, I've been promoted to compliance analyst and now to civil rights officer. And I obtained my master's degree while working at MST. So, public transit, what I love about it is that it epitomizes really diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have federal transit laws, Title VI, ADA, DBE. Everything I do is in a regulatory environment whereby we must make sure that all of our actions are done in a non-discriminatory manner. So DEI was just it's come naturally. It's just, this is it now for us, and it's been very new for us, and I know we're going to talk more about that. But that's just a short story of my path to where I am right now.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It really brings out how important the rich lived experiences, right?
Yes.
So thank you for that. And Ignacio, yourself.
First of all, Sonia and the OurOffice team, thanks for having me today. And Deanne, pleasure to share the webinar with you today. You probably notice an accent, so I don't hide it. I'm originally from Spain, so I'm Hispanic. And that's where I was born and raised, both of, a big portion of my life. I worked in the UK, worked in Germany, and then I basically transitioned to the US in 2004, and I naturalized. Being an alien, which is a word that I don't like, but being an alien, I ended up naturalizing and becoming an American citizen. So, I come from a very diverse background. When actually I moved into the US, ironically, my brother was living in Europe. He was still living in Spain. My parents actually spent some time in Africa, and I was here living in America. So that was the irony of destiny, I guess. And then my wife is originally from Poland, so I'm actually very fortunate that I have both a girl and a boy, a daughter and a son. And they're trilingual, right? So this is the environment we live in. They were born trilingual. We like to pride, their culture, heritage, and basically what drives me to DI and what I think is very center stone in my day-to-day life is because at the end of the day, I want my children to basically feel comfortable in this country. I want to basically make sure that they're allowed to have equal opportunity from a gender perspective. I want them to be accepted with the cultural baggage that they have and not have to be ashamed of it. And I want them to basically do everything possible in the working and enterprise environment, so they find the right way, the right place to be themselves, whoever they're gonna be in the future. So that's the background. Sonia, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. So thank you again for both sharing all of your background. You're the right people to have here today, right? But sharing the this important topic today of to DEI or not to DEI, right? As we call the title of this webinar. And that's because, there have been many cycles, right, of focus through decades, in fact. I think it's important to start with a little bit of a history lesson, if you will, about what are these cycles? What do we mean by ups and downs of DEI? The reason is because we are at another inflection point where we've witnessed significant change, like U.S. Supreme Court decision to overturn affirmative action in university admissions and various mandates now to stop or scale back DEI initiatives in some states and regions of the country. So the central question we'll put to you in a moment is if this is another temporary period in the typical DEI cycles that we've seen over the past few decades, or is it something else that's going on? So here's a little bit of a history. Some of it we won't remember because it's a little while back, but as we get further into the more recent decades, I think you'll remember, and I'll pause to get your memories of maybe like around 1980s and so, but we really should go back to 1940s. In 41, President Roosevelt issued an executive order, an EO 8802, that specifies there would be no discrimination of U.S. defense industry on the basis of race, color, or national origin. So now this was a political move, of course, but it did establish the Fair Employment Practices Committee and signaled some commitment to non-discriminatory policy that would be seen later on in other EOs, for example, by President Truman, I think it was in 1948 or so, required desegregation, equal treatment, equal opportunities in armed services for all male individuals, regardless of color, creed, or nationality. Now, we fast forward to the 1960s, some real laws start to emerge, right? As a result of the civil rights movement, such as the Equal Pay Act of 1963, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Title VII, and then, Age Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967, and so on. And these all lead to these diversity training programs, do's and don'ts lists to help employees adjust to working in more integrated offices. And while these were helpful, today, I think there's a recent Harvard Business Review study, for example, in 2019, that really proved that the effects of training alone, like some unconscious bias training and things that people do, is really not that significant and long-lasting, especially among males and especially among white people. So now that's HBR. and I think some of us have seen this, that when it's done alone, it's not that effective. So you fast forward to 1980s, and by 1980s, and this is where y'all probably remember a little bit, so I want to draw from your memories, both Ignacio and Deanna. There, we saw a decline in workplace diversity initiatives as government regulation was being lax, and there was some sense of diversity fatigue, as it's referred to. I think today people talk about that as well. But there was also a shift towards an era, from diversity for compliance to diversity as a business necessity. And overwhelming data that started to show up that although women and minorities are being hired, there was still a movement in their career growth. And so it was hard to retain and engage them. Do you remember those days yourselves? Deanna or Ignacio, do you hear me? Do you remember 1980s?
I remember them well. Yes, I remember the 80s well. And as I mentioned, in the introduction, those were really critical times in who I have become and what the things that I have considered and the approach I have taken. But I do remember those issues. And, I think I'm going to turn it over to Ignacio simply because I think I talked quite a bit about that earlier on.
Yeah, so, I mean, Yeah, I remember. I definitely remember those days. I actually happened to have a technical background, so I studied engineering in those years, and it was not. I mean, which is one of the issues that we still carry on today, right? I mean, gender diversity was not very prominent in engineering schools back then. With years, and I had the opportunity to become for a short period, an associate lecturer. I could see how, women started basically joining engineering schools and they started basically being active in science, right? I mean, a little bit, fast forward a little bit, right? I mean, because I just happened to come to the States right after the very unfortunate events on September 11th. I mean, I remember, actually, I remember two things that are clear, that stuck in my mind. I remember going to the U.S. Embassy to basically get my visa for the first time. And I remember reading the statistics that basically said, I still remember very neatly on the wall, right, that said 65% or 63% of the PhDs in the US were basically immigrants, right? And it was interesting that when I arrived to the US, as a result of some of the measures that were put in place, right? Some of those foreign students were having some hard time to actually get their visas and the student visas to study in the US. And knowing people in academia, right, they will basically highlight, how they felt that some of the universities were losing, some of the talent advantage that they had for a long period of time, right, to the point that they started basically grouping together and trying to start changing policies because they felt that this was at the hardcore of the ability to be, technology leaders if that talent was not captured and attracted in the US, right? So I think that there was a very clear lesson learned that I think hit, our academia back then, and on how important, to maintain the flow of diversity and to be able to basically, have an open and welcoming society, what the consequences of not having that could be, right? So.
Well, and you bring up a really important point because it is known today that when you compare STEM degrees, and STEM degrees, all degrees are important, STEM degrees are critical to our security, our safety, our economic competitiveness. So science, technology, engineering and math are really front and center when it comes to innovation and those kind of things. So today we produce one per capita in this country. We produce one engineer, where other countries, our adversaries in particular, Russia, North Korea, other countries, they produce 4 for every one that we produce per capita. And then there is so many industries that specifically are missing. Like even you think of something like business insurance. I was talking to some people in insurance, and they're missing like about 500,000 people over the next few years in terms of, and they're very acutely aware of this. Financial services. I mean, this is not just, in fact, limited to the ones we would normally think of, like engineering or math, but and these are areas where women, people with disabilities, people of color, they're not on par in terms of how we produce or we graduate these kind of degrees out of colleges. And what's worse is once we actually have degrees that come out of colleges, many of them, women, for example, within 7 years, about 30% or more have opted out, once they start into the workplace. There was a stat at least a few years ago from HBCUs that, of every 2 people of color that they produce, only 1 gets an opportunity to actually work in their field, in STEM fields out of HBCUs, which is, people talk about, hiring the best talent and hiring, from the pool. The pool is underutilized. There's ample evidence that shows that, but that is all just the connection of how important the concept of diversity is to really our economy, and having the workforce and having the talent and the expertise needed to maintain our position in the world, and just have everyday nice lives that we all are used to having. It also connects to the history thing that I'm going to finish here in a moment, I promise, but it really brings us to the 2000s, where, you know, there was an era, and you were talking about gender equity, and where there was an era of really focusing on breaking the glass ceiling in terms of gender equality in the workplace. And it evolved in the 2010s as you look at like the prevailing themes, if you will, towards recognition of the increasing importance of cultural diversity in the workplace, because we're, especially in this country, we're such a melting pot. And actually there's melting pots everywhere around the world, even in other countries in Europe, as you go to, and I remember when I was a kid in Europe or Paris or, you know, any of the major capitals of Europe, you know, the look and feel of it is quite different, right? When you go to these places, and you know, it's just a very diverse population. So of course, in 2020s, you know, first years of our current decade, we're all familiar with how the murder of George Floyd really ignited. It was an explosion of focus on DEI. DEI officer roles jumped by over 120% between just May and September of 2020, despite the COVID-19 effects that were still going on with the economy. And actually, according to some research, a majority of employed US adults, about I think close to 60% of them, found this increased effort on workplace DEI in recent years to be a good thing for everyone. But again, more recently, the last especially 12, 18 months, there seems to be a down cycle and fatigue setting in again in regards to DEI and the efforts, and public opinion is bifurcated, varies widely across the country. So when it comes to workplace DEI, especially, which is the focus of our conversation, there is, of course, you know, clearly a bifurcation across organizations. We see it every day in our work. Some leaders are doubling down and doing even more. They find it even more important to be supportive of their employees at a time when there may be some challenges that they're facing for a variety of reasons. And then there's some who are actually moving away and saying, you know, we have other priorities. This is a time to focus on those things, which are also important. And I want to say, in our conversations, we don't want to shy away from hard conversations, right? So I invite you to both share your thoughts openly, for or maybe not for, you know, how much effort should be put into DEI. Full disclosure, you're both customers of ours, so I will share that. But you know, I think it's important to have a balanced view about, you know, how much focus is put and where is put. And so my question to you is, given these cycles since the 40s, right? How do you see the current environment? Is this focus on workplace culture, DEI? Is it an enduring area of focus now for organizations after the last few years have been through? Or is it, again, you know, a period of downturn? We'll go through this for the next, you know, maybe 5, 10 years or so before it comes back up again. How do you see it? And should leaders maybe, I mean, maybe it is a time to focus their efforts and spend their time and money in other ways that are, you know, other challenges, which there are many, right? Challenges abound. I mean, we're not missing challenges these days, it seems. How do you see that? I mean, just at a balanced view. And please start, whoever wants to go first.
I'll go ahead. First of all, you know, so many DEI, I like to explain to people sometimes who get a little bit irritated. It's definitely, you know, we've made a lot of strides, but it's definitely out there. It's just a term. Our fight for equality and equity has been baked in to the United States' challenges, whether we've succeeded, failed, faltered, and it's not going away. People will demand equal rights to opportunities. And I know that we've had a success story in the Salinas area, particularly in Monterey County, with a high percentage of Hispanic individuals. And we also had a very kind of devastating participation rate among them, particularly girls, in school, high school graduation and such. And now with combined efforts, including a junior college here, we have placed satellite colleges around the county. We have seen the graduation rate go up, literacy rates go up, poverty rates go down, and opportunities created. And they have been a driver. This kind of integration has been a driver, for an economic driver for our county. So, I like to think, humans always rant and rave about the latest thing, no matter what it is, not realizing that it's just another iteration. And then we make this progress, and it's hard to come by, and we fight. And then we look back and we wonder what it was we were fighting about before. But then we live another day. This is the cycle of human development, of acceptance and improvement, I believe. And I don't think there's any way to make everyone comfortable about it. I don't think we have to make everyone particularly comfortable. We have to focus on simply that everyone who can do a job deserves the right to earn a living for their family. Everybody who wants to achieve something has the right to do so. And I think we have to keep up the fight. I think that there may be changes in how DEI is implemented. We may even have some new focus. But I would certainly hope that we would not, see those efforts just vanish and disappear. And I highly doubt that that's going to happen.
And Ignacio, I want to hear your perspective on this too. Meanwhile, I want to acknowledge there's a couple of questions already in our Q&A. The first one says, and I'll just put it out there and then we can, you can weave it in as you need to, but we'll make sure that they're answered. The first one says, and by the way, I appreciate you can ask anonymously. This is an anonymous one. How can companies address the challenge of ensuring that D&I programs are genuinely inclusive rather than just surface level efforts, like I think they mean like performative type efforts. And then what practices have worked when you're dealing with detractors for DEI? There's someone who's asking that. And there's a third question. We'll get to it. I'll just put those two out there. And Ignacio, I'll give you a chance to also answer just a fundamental question. Is this another up and down cycle, or is there a new normal? Has there been a significant shift?
Look, I don't think this is a passion. I don't, right? I mean, I think I share my own purpose and my own motivation, and this is not, this is a lifelong mission, right? In a sense. And if we think about the whys, and I think Diane basically, I subscribe everything that I heard Diane saying, but I mean, if we think about the purpose, right? And this is as part of the journey, right? A lot of the discussions that we tend to have in the beginning of that journey. So I remember those discussions, Sonia, right? When we were basically starting the journey with you and our office about the why, right? Why are we doing this, right? What is the real reason? And needless to say that, you can basically take any study out there, and there are numerous studies, right? But you can actually take it closer to your work environment, and this is about basically making sure that you can basically work with the best talent, with the in a very inclusive environment that basically yields from a society, but also from a company standpoint, the best results, right? And I mean, even in I took some classes many years ago about modeling and social modeling, and the science is there, right? I mean, diversity drives a better outcome. So with all the challenges that we have as a society, with all the challenges that we have from a company perspective, I mean, this is not something that is really optional if you want to basically remain meaningful. It's something that you need to bring to the front line of your culture. You need to bring to the front line of your commitment, a stakeholders' commitment, and it's a journey. It's definitely a journey, right?
Yeah, I appreciate you referring to when we first met, back in 2019, I think it was. It seems like a long time ago. I remember what your CEO said at the time was this to your executive, actually, to your executive team. He said, we're doing this for competitiveness. And I really appreciate that. And I think talking about the why is really important. And I'll put out another why out there. We need to be on the side of more diversity, equity, and inclusion because we need to be on the right side of history. And what do I mean by that? You look at the workforce diversification. Today, over 50% of the workforce in this country are millennials and Gen Z. And the millennials and the Gen Z are majority diverse. And they care. And there's ample data that even people that are cisgender white males, but they're Gen Z and millennials, like my son, they care about DEI. They ask about that when they're going to join a company. They won't stay at a company and they won't be as productive if they don't feel it's an inclusive environment where they can also belong. So I think it's a simple matter to be on the right side of history. And if someone decides that there's other priorities at the expense, yes, there are other priorities, but somehow it's not a shrinking pie. It's not like this is the pie. If we do more of this, we can't do more of other things. I always say it's like safety and quality. It'll bite you in the long run. No matter what you do, it's not going away. I mean, if you do surface things, and talking to the question about, genuinely inclusive efforts versus surface level, as the person who asked the question here phrased it, I will say this, I was one of those who was trying for 6-7 years when I had a double hat, and I was also responsible for DEI in addition to my engineering role at a major company. I failed to build a genuinely inclusive workplace. We made some strides. We hired more diverse people, but we didn't treat it like any other part of business. We didn't have enough data. We didn't have a strategy around it. We didn't project manage our initiatives. We had lots of training. We had lots of events. We had lots of, money we spent actually coaching, all these kind of things, but we just didn't have the infrastructure and we didn't know any better. Of course, fast forward, now we're doing a lot of things about that as part of my current job. But I think everybody, unfortunately, I want to take one misconception away, that just because it doesn't feel genuinely inclusive doesn't mean that the leaders don't mean it to be genuinely inclusive. Sometimes we just don't know any better, unfortunately, because of maybe the roots of the origins of how workplace DEI efforts started. There's a tendency to think of it more as a touchy-feely thing, which of course it is, everything is, and especially this, it's a human thing. But there's also some science and data and planning and strategy and all those things that make other initiatives work in the workplace that are needed to make it really feel genuinely inclusive. Any thoughts about that? I mean, you both have experience with that, actually. You do genuinely make it inclusive, and your efforts are very business oriented in terms of taking it seriously.
Yes, and at MST, we have really committed to our DEI program. We began just a little over, I think, maybe 2 years ago is when we began to explore having a DEI program together. MST has a very low percentage participation rate of females. Most of our employees are coach operators, mechanics. They're in the labor force, and those typically tend to be more non-traditional roles. What's interesting is that it's not uncommon to see a female school bus driver, but the coach operator jobs we definitely very underutilized. So we've made DEI for us is really promoting very good paying jobs that we have, jobs with benefits and longevity, and really trying to reach out and we all of our jobs are available. We have strict recruitment and selection guidelines, but even at the applicant stage, we seem to get, fewer females. So we're really trying to push against that because, again, it's a good job for everyone, and our workforce is better served when we have a more diverse workforce. We know that. When we have begun rolling this out to our employees, absolutely, there have been some that have pushed against it. Again, not because necessarily they don't believe in equality, but because they're afraid of a term. They're afraid that somehow more for someone else or accepting someone else means less for them. And I think it is really important, without sacrificing our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and not being afraid to say, no, this is not what you think it is. This is exactly where we are going. Begin discussing with your workforce. Begin having those conversations with the workforce, answering those questions. Don't be afraid to answer questions, and don't isolate someone who may raise a ruckus, because that person is your opportunity. And I firmly believe that they will come on board. We just tend to respond in these kind of primal ways sometimes, but we really have to bring people along. We can't be afraid, to just, state that, no, here's where we are, and we really want to promote diversity in our workforce. It's important,
That's such a great answer to the question that was asked, about practices that I've worked when dealing with detractors of DEI. And I'll say it in this way. I mean, exactly what you said, just maybe the way I would phrase it is, inclusion means being inclusive of those who don't agree with you as well. Inclusion is being inclusive of those who don't agree with you as well. This is, if there's one thing that this, Ken, that's exactly what you're saying, right? You can't isolate them. You can't just say, oh, those people, they just, they're just not maybe yet aware, or don't understand the importance of this. Inclusion is truly, you are inclusive when you yourself, see how well you can tolerate people today that politically don't agree with you, maybe, right? Or, how do you handle disagreements? Inclusion is really having allowance for all of that. Ignacio, you have any strategies for dealing with detractors?
Look, I mean, there are always those, right? I mean, we are by nature resistant to change. But again, this is not, like I said before, this is not a fashion that basically expires with time. This is, like you said, I like the way you said it, Sonia. It's to basically, be on the other side of history, right? So, I mean, when people believe in, that this is maybe a way of doing reverse discrimination, right? I mean, this is just the opposite. This is removing roadblocks from the unfortunate ones that have not had the opportunity to excel and be themselves, right? Going back to the mission. But I think it's, if we think about, some of the efforts that we've done at AM General recently, right? I mean, we've tried to simplify our mission vision, right, with the concept of writing with Sergeant Smith. And we're very purposeful with, who Sergeant Smith is. I mean, we've never basically associated or tagged it to a gender. We've never associated it and tagged it to an ethnicity. I mean, those are the war fighters, right? That are basically, so I mean, you cannot question, right, that that's not the purpose of a company like us. So the best way I would say strategically is to put it in the front line of, who you serve and what the ultimate purpose of the company is. And I think that our CEO basically, simplified very much for us, right? Sergeant Smith can be, our daughter. Sergeant Smith can be, African American. Sergeant Smith can be a Hispanic person. I mean, so when you put it in the front line and the context of your vision and mission, again, I think it's very difficult to challenge it, right?
Yeah, I just want to, for everybody to make sure that, because I do think that this is a cool way. So AM General built fighting vehicles for the warfighter, right? And the Humvees, of course, are well known for everybody around the world, right? It's, I think today, still that's the largest installed base of tactical vehicles that are operational around the world. And so Sergeant Smith, as Ignacio says, Jim, your CEO, came up with this idea of, this is about Sergeant Smith to humanize it, to say, hey, this is a human. And that's another thing I was going to say about detractors that's interesting is, you can humanize it, right? When you talk about gender equity, or when you talk about, people of color, people with disabilities, we all know somebody, either a relative, a loved one, a friend, a colleague. If you think of it on those terms, if there's a way to ask people to think of it in those ways, and always what I ask people, I always tell them, the most I can ask you, and the only thing I ask you, is to keep an open mind, right? I mean, open mind is a good thing. Everybody would agree on that, right? And then one thing I want to take issue with you, Deanna, just a little bit, if I may, is in our own work, I don't necessarily need or believe everyone ultimately to come around. Mm-hmm. Some will not. And that's okay too.
Yeah, I hope, thank you for that, because I do not believe that either. I do not. I really think you stated it most clearly. Bringing everyone in does not mean some people have to move out. And I'm not actually out to change everybody's mind. At the end of the day, we're committing to this. It's part of our values. But I do believe in understanding that not everybody will agree. But I also believe that over time, people will understand, and particularly when they themselves, in their families, face some sort of challenge. So thank you for clarifying that. And I don't want to make it seem like, everybody's just going to be, agree. We don't live in that world.
I appreciate that. We actually have a comment that's relevant. Says, what systems are in place, do you have in place to accommodate different, the discourse in the company to foster belonging? They explain that there seems to be, for progressive companies, sometimes there is a feeling that those with different opinions, people who are conservative, are shunned, and therefore they don't feel included. That's exactly what we're talking about. We have one of our clients is led by a Black woman. And actually the company is, they're in a region of the country, they're about 70%, I think, Black African-American, people of color. And yet when I was doing a CEO interview with her, and I asked, what does diversity mean to you? She said, when I could have an ultra-conservative, white male, here coming to speak to us, and we all are inclusive of his opinions. We are actually thoughtful. We don't just immediately kind of put our own unconscious bias on that and say, oh, we know he comes from a conservative background, or, or his history or his actions in the past. We need to genuinely understand and allow for it. Those differences will always exist. And there is just different lived experiences that maybe people get exposed to, and over time they might evolve in their opinions and in their views. But it's not, the purpose of bringing everybody in together is not to make everybody the same. There's a comment actually here from someone appreciate that. It says there are two key pieces that have to be included in DEI program or strategy in order to be effective. Senior leaders have to see a tie into the financial performance of the organization, and they also have to know what's in it for them to participate and commit. That's an interesting comment. What do we think about, gee, this is one of the questions I was going to ask later, but now all this activity is bringing things, and there's a couple other questions we haven't answered yet. We will get to them in a moment. Please keep them coming. Again, as we said, we'll answer as many as we can and even afterwards. But there has been a move during the same era in the last decade or so towards the definition of, company responsibilities being towards beyond their shareholders, to being in a larger set of key stakeholders that includes their employees, includes their customers, includes suppliers and others. And so there is this idea of the tie into the financial performance, which no doubt is very important. But how do you see that, and in terms of having a successful effort in the context of all the other responsibilities that the company has? There was also an earlier comment about just responsibility of companies, also in terms of, for example, supporting colleges and universities so they can produce more diverse talent, so that then that pool is available to the companies. How do you see all of that? So I know it's a big ball of wax, so have at it. Ignacio, you want to start with that, or?
Yeah. So this goes back to the basics of push and pull, right? I mean, you can basically use this approach also for I feel with DEI, right? In the beginning, when you introduce it, right, in an organization, I mean, you need to basically establish some level of a structure, but it's really, creating a diversity council. And I will say, I mean, as a DEI executive sponsor in our organization, I take pride, and I think, also under the leadership of our diversity and inclusion director, I mean, we have a lot of initiative, right? They've started employee resource groups, right? That now, they have their own plans, their own agendas. So now we can basically move into the support role, right? And there's a lot of initiatives that are really being pulled and that require just resource support. And I would say it's kind of a grassroots, right? In a sense, when the culture starts basically maturing as an organization, and that takes a process, it's a journey. Then you can see how that is split. Starts having an effect not only in internal stakeholders but also in other areas of the organization. Right now, very recently, we have created a position to basically transmit that vision on diversity and inclusion with our supply base, for example, right? And we have a person dedicated in nurturing communication. In our industry is also very critical, right? We work with a lot of small businesses, women-owned business-owned, veteran business-owned businesses, and they are at the hardcore of the industrial base, of our industry in the defense and aerospace industry, right? So universities, and again, it's everything comes natural once you basically gain some maturity in culture, and then it's very important that we stay observant, right? As leaders, in any opportunity that, again, it's removing roadblocks or facilitating, right? So for us, one of the biggest commitments, and I think, again, it's part of the journey of getting to the next stage, is including a DEI objective, right, for our own enterprise for next year. I mean, again, it's a sign of commitment, and it's a sign of support in these in the values. And but one thing that is very important is, like, you cannot improve what you don't measure. So I mean, it goes back to let me use a little bit this concept on push and pull, and now let me reflect on KPIs and measurement, right? I mean, this cannot be a nebulous of just best wishes, right? I mean, if you are basically deliberating, targeting ethnicity or gender diversity or equity, across different areas of the enterprise, I mean, you have to have, commitment to basically measure and improve. And that is very critical, right? Because otherwise, this can basically become just a best wish, right? That is out there, but doesn't basically create specific action plans that basically drive commitment and leadership commitment to get there. So that is one aspect that maybe in the early stages when you start this journey, right? Everything seems more of a wish and desire than an ultimate expectation, but it's very, very important that you actually look at yourself in the mirror, as I like to say, right? And compare how you're basically accomplishing your DEI goals, or even benchmark yourself with other industries or other industry partners or competitors that basically and learn, right? I mean, there's a lot of learning from others in this journey.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And I like the tie-in too, and this answers one of the questions about, again, this responsibility of companies to connect with colleges and universities, for example, and promote diversity there. I would say, as you're saying, if you start with a strategy, right, and you say, what are our strategic priorities? Then it also relates to that comment that was made about financial success, because for some companies, they have all the financial success in the world, but their branding is off. That's the real problem, right? Or, some other people have branding okay, but for some reason, they're not able to hire. Hiring is a problem for them. Retention is a problem for them. Top line is a problem. Bottom line is a problem. Competitors are a problem. And there's all kinds of different things, And so I think what I learned in my own practice was that ability to initially, it all starts with connecting to what are the big priorities of the organization. And there's things beyond even financial. And then it brings other key stakeholders. And then you can kind of like do a root cause corrective action kind of a process, right? Where you say, what are the key issues we're trying to address here, or the kind of strategic priorities that we have for the next 12 to 18 months. And what are the barriers to that? And I bet you, in our work, we found that there's always a tie-in with your workplace culture. And workplace culture, as you said, it really starts with the people. You talked about ERGs, you talked about a committee. This can't all be top down. I love this pull-push, there is this, as long as that's how I felt all the time. I was always pushing down. It was always, I'm carrying the boulder up the mountain, right? But at a certain point when you have to facilitate, and this is what a lot of our work is about, as you're well aware of, is how do we engage others in taking micro actions? There's a comment here also about, we do surveys and then we have some other ways of getting anonymous feedback, and they don't always agree. Why is that? Well, it's clear, right? We always tell people your culture is defined at the edges. The 80%, if you're planning your infrastructure, your processes, your benefits, everything you do is targeting the 80%. There's always going to be that 20% whose needs aren't going to be met, who have some issues or roadblocks in their own career development. And unless you take the time, there's no magic bullet, right? But how do you hear about that? How do you know what their needs are? So it's really, this is the hard work of creating a truly transparent and safe environment for people to share. There's a lot of other questions here. Actually, I'm trying to read quickly and see if y'all can add. And meanwhile, at the end, I'm going to give you each 30 seconds. I'll give you because we're getting close. We have about a few minutes left. Please think of the one thing you would ask our audience to take away, and then later on, a lot of people will listen to the recording of this over time. What is the one thing a leader can take away that would be effective, that would work in most cases, as a key action? Because we're always very action oriented in our webinars and our conversations. That they can go back and they could this week or next week at the latest, they could do something about it that could move their effort forward. And there is, so I want to also answer a couple of other questions here before we get to that, is at one point, will we include political affiliation as a DEI initiative? Some people may accept your gender or ethnicity, but still struggle with allowing you to share your political views. This is a venue that DEI programs can address. We actually had a roundtable conversation, which is an invite-only private conversation we have every month with our customers and a few thought leaders, and it was just about political differences and how is that part of diversity. I'll let you, whoever wants to answer. I mean, Deanna, you're in a public space there, so maybe you can talk about it.
Thank you for that, because I did want to mention and or remind everyone that MST is not a for-profit business. We provide a public service. We're publicly funded. And I want to mention, I think this might answer maybe even one of the other questions you were discussing. What's interesting is that MST has revised its brand vision and values about the same time period that we've been implementing DEI within our workforce. And because we serve the community, because we get people to jobs, healthcare, and school, we changed our brand vision to connecting communities, creating opportunity, and being kind to our planet. Our brand values are safety, caring for others in all we do, friendliness, being welcoming, helpful, and understanding, dependability, earning trust every day, and diversity, valuing our differences, achievement, aspiring to be better. And I'm pleased that MST's brand vision and values, what we want to deliver to our communities, are very much aligned with the DEI actions we're taking to try to connect our employees, make them feel welcome, to make sure that all of the opportunities available are open to them, and that they feel that they belong within the organization. So, I just wanted to kind of put a plug in for that it's not, DEI isn't something you do in an isolated fashion. It can't work that way. It really needs to permeate the company culture.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I will add, 100% agree, and that, to answer the question directly as well, yes, political affiliation and opinions are certainly part of diversity the way we regard it, at least, and in this conversation, if anyone disagrees, please bring it up. But I think it is another dimension that, especially in recent years, we had this again, the roundtable conversation. We came to the conclusion that you can't ban it, you can't disregard it, you can't act like it's not there. People have political opinions, they're going to talk about it, it's going to color their work. Some of our organizations are impacted by some of these, the policies and the political decisions. So certainly is part of it. I do want to acknowledge also a couple of questions that are around anti-racism. And how whether it's possible even to benefit the Black community without really a focus on anti-racism. And there's something about gender diversity and white women mostly benefiting from DEI efforts. I think that is certainly true. I mean, the data shows that it's true. I think the question is about why do you think that is the case? I think that's the case just in the evolution. You look at, for example, NASDAQ required, I'll just use that as a recent example real quick here. NASDAQ required, women on boards, before they required people of color on boards. By the way, that decision to require that was just upheld in court because it was challenged, and it was just upheld just about a few weeks ago. And so it just, one follows the other. I think some of it is just numbers, perhaps. I'm not making excuses. I'm not saying that was right. Certainly, every dimension. In our work, we look at intersectionalities. There's sexual orientation. There's religion in some of the global companies who work with that dimension of diversity. There is certainly disability. I mean, that is 25% of the population of this nation identify as having some level of disability, and yet it is not as prevalent. So I think these are all as important, equally as important, and all should be, of course, addressed. It's just, as Deanna said, it's just how things evolve. 30 seconds each of you. What is the one thing, we are going to stop on time here in a minute, but 30 seconds, what do you think the one thing that people should take away from this and go and try and do?
I would say, don't be afraid of it.
Okay,
Yeah, don't be afraid.
awesome.
Um,
Ignacio,
we have to do this. Don't be afraid.
Ignacio, what's the one thing?
So I agree. Don't be afraid. It's a journey. Be patient. Be a mentor and listen. Listen. I think that's and don't be afraid, right? I mean, it's if you agree with the purpose, it's the right thing to do. We want to follow the other side of the history, like you said.
I'll add mine. Start with yourself. What's the one thing you can do in your environment? You know better than we do. Not being afraid, doing something, but what is that one thing you're going to do, right? Micro actions, sharing something, being authentic, all those good stuff. Thanks again. We have to leave it there. This has been an amazing conversation. We could go on for another hour or two, I'm sure. And thank you for the questions. Thank you, everybody. If we haven't answered you, please write us. You can write us at webinars@OurOffice.io. You can write any of us. I'm Sonia with a Y, SONYA, at OurOffice.io, Anushka at OurOffice.io, DEI at OurOffice.io. There's many emails you can write us. And please ask us any questions that we missed or if we fell short in any regard. Thanks again for everybody, and can't thank you enough. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.